Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Is it time for Turkey and the European Union to acknowledge that their ways have parted? The EU Parliament seems to think so. Last week, it voiced concern about the wave of repression that has followed last summer's coup attempt in Turkey. Tens of thousands of Turkish citizens, lawyers, journalists, teachers have been arrested or fired from their jobs. Human rights organizations accuse the government of torturing detainees. Some critics say the coup has provided President Erdogan with a welcome excuse to crack down on political opponents. Now he's also threatening to pull out of the refugee transfer deal he made with EU leaders. The European Parliament appears to have had enough. It's recommending a freeze on membership talks with Turkey. So can the refugee deal and EU-Turkish relations be rescued? Or is Turkey getting ready to say, so long, Europe? That's what we want to talk about today on Quadriga with three people who are following the situation in Turkey very closely. It's a pleasure to welcome Gökcen Beyinli. She's a journalist from Turkey and an academic currently working with Oxford University. And she says Turkey's been a part of Europe for centuries. It belongs to the EU, not Erdogan. Accession talks should continue. Remzi Aru is a Turkish-German businessman and founder of the party Alliance of German Democrats. He says, fortunately, Turkey's no longer obedient to Europe. Relations will inevitably continue. The ball is now in Europe's court.
Thank you.
And it's a pleasure to welcome Thumann. He writes about international politics for Zeit, where he also served as Turkey correspondent. And he says the Turkish government is fighting a war not only against terrorists, but against ordinary citizens. The EU has to address these problems without burning bridges. Gökcen Beyinli, the EU Parliament's resolution was non-binding. Ultimately, it is the Commission and the member states that have to decide whether to continue membership talks with Turkey. Now, all three of you are basically saying those accession talks should continue. But let's be honest, Turkey in its present state of repression and human rights violations has no conceivable path to membership. So isn't it time to face reality?
I think we have to first consider that Turkey is not equal to Erdogan. Turkey is a big country with various voices. So if the EU just regard Erdogan as the right partner of Turkey, then of course the accession talks should come to an end. But even within AKP, there are different voices that regard EU as an important contribution for Turkey's future. So I think those things should be taken account in these negotiations.
Thumann, you said in your opening statement that the EU does need to address repression in Turkey. Now, the prospect of membership was long thought of as a kind of carrot that would encourage Turkey to moderate its behavior, to democratize. But the fact is, given what we're seeing, there appears to be very little leverage at all that the EU can wield over Turkey. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, well, we have to remember that in the initial phase, when there were reforms in Turkey, that the EU didn't quite react properly to that. That at the time, back to 10 years ago, the EU should have taken Turkey by the word, but they did not. It's a bit late today as President Erdogan has turned on a different path, but I still think that the EU membership negotiation does not really serve as a lever to go directly into membership, but rather to keep ways open to talk, because we have no other fora, mind you, to talk about burning issues. And I think in these, when you talk, you should talk straight, open, and address the problems Turkey is facing.
Remzi Aru, can Turkey really afford to ignore pressure from Europe, given the fact that Europe is Turkey's biggest trading partner?
No, Turkey cannot afford to ignore Europe, and like any other country, cannot afford to ignore partners. You know, there's a very natural ties to Europe that there will be for the next decades and also centuries, because 5 million people of Turkish origin live in Europe. And so to ignore and to cut the ties to Europe would say to cut the ties to all these people. So Europe and Turkey sit in the same boat. So if you try to destabilize Turkey, or if Turkey tries to destabilize or ignore Europe, it will be the same boat that will sink. And so for both sides, if they want or not, there will always be a need to cooperate and to talk together. But in which level, this is another question. This has to be figured out. But right now, I think I agree with Mr. Thumann. It's time to be more honest and also to realize that Turkey is a vigilant democracy. So there has been things in Turkey that the reaction might be overreaction. But if you remember the reunification in Germany, where not one single bullet fall, nobody was killed, no tanks were on the street, hundreds of thousands of people. Also in my family, I'm married to a German woman, and my father-in-law was pulled out of the army, and my mother-in-law was pulled out of her job, and so the careers were ended, and so nobody died, and the reaction was not similar. It was elsewhere worse than in Germany. So now you see in Turkey, hundreds of people have died, thousands, 10,000 have been wounded. And in this situation, in a country with a neighborhood like this, with civil wars and destabilization, it is, I think, normal that a country would react like this. And furthermore, the president of Turkey is elected by a majority, so you have nobody else to talk to.
Let me take a look. Let us take a look shortly at what you refer to as the vigilant democracy. But first, I'd like to ask both of you to tell me what you're hearing from people in Turkey in regard to their reaction to the EU Parliament's recommendation not to continue accession, and the degree to which people in Turkey actually still even want to be EU members.
I definitely think that many people, a lot of people still in Turkey believe that EU membership is a very important step for Turkey's future. And many people still believe that despite Erdogan's authoritarian policies or threats to the EU, the negotiations and the relationship should continue, because then EU would push Turkey in a more authoritarian rule or to Middle East. So I think Turkey should stay part of Europe.
And Remzi Aru, would you agree when you talk to people in Turkey, are you hearing disappointment at what the EU Parliament said, or are you hearing them say, hey, look, if they don't want us, we don't need them?
If you spoke to people in Turkey 5, 6, 7 years ago, 70% were in favor of the European Union. Right now, 70 to 80% are against it. But European Union is just one of the possibilities to work together and to communicate together. Finally, I'm a businessman, and I think that the peace is always brought by businessmen, not by politicians and not by military people. And so the relations will carry on, will go on. But it's time to be more honest on both sides, to see and to have also the relations and to see the facts in both countries. For instance, I give you one small example. I'm a founder of a party in Germany. And so my social media accounts were closed in Germany. All were closed. All were closed. Facebook accounts, all were closed.
By whom?
Nobody knows. Turkey is very honest. If something happens, the president says, it was me to do this. In Germany, it's very difficult to find out. You can guess, because nobody will take responsibility. And my bank accounts are closed always. And I'm not crying and going to Turkey and say, hey, Germany is so bad and doing this and that, and please intervene. I'm not going to Russia.
What's your interpretation of why that happened?
I think this party that I opened is addressing mainly people with migration background, and this is a potential of 20 to 25% of the votes in Germany if you take everybody who's married with Germans, and we have also 10% Germans. And right now we have a big oppression and we have a big problem in Germany, and I'm not running to Trump and say, hey, help something, or to Putin and help me in Germany. So I try to solve the problems here, and so I think this is something that has to be solved by the people in itself, and I think it's not helpful for Turkey and also not for Europe if people come from other countries and try to get help in Europe or somewhere else. So it's very similar situations.
Michel Thumann, repression of freedom of speech, of...
Well, I appreciate very much that you're not running to Turkey to seek help, but I think you have zillions of opportunity to seek help in Germany and to work your way through the institutions. If you compare that to Turkey, or if you were in a similar situation in Turkey, I think things would have been much harder for you.
You guessed this.
I
yes.
have. No, I'm not guessing. I have a couple of friends. They are jailed at the moment. They do not know what for. They are huge problems, and if you are jailed or persecuted in some way, actually to get to talk to anybody who is responsible for that. And you know, there's an emergency law in Turkey now which allows the authorities to do anything,
like in France,
which is,
yes.
I think, which is
It's
not
like
very much unlike in France, is actually a model to do anything what pleases the government and the president, very much unlike in France, and I think the opposite model to what's happening in Germany.
Let's let's just come back to that in one moment, but I would like to take a quick look at some of the events and measures that have been taken under that emergency laws. In fact, the events and measures that led the EU Parliament to conclude that accession talks should be put on ice.
Mass arrests of journalists, teachers, and judges. Most of those detained have been accused of supporting terrorism. And those who protest against the arrests often end up in jail themselves.
Innocent people are jailed every day. We've had enough of this.
Human rights groups have accused the Turkish authorities of systematically abusing detainees. Kamil Uluç was arrested and then tortured for days. He was accused of supporting the PKK, a Kurdish separatist group.
They tied weights to our testicles and dragged us around the room. I'm still so sore down there that it hurts when I go to the toilet.
The charges against Uluç were later dropped, and he was released. These repressive measures have created a climate of fear. Can Turkey remain a viable partner for the EU?
Gökcen Beyinli, what are you hearing from friends and family in Turkey about how grave and how widespread this repression is, and whether, in fact, it is justified because Turkey needs to be vigilant?
No, it's not. I mean, it depends on with whom you talk, of course. For AKP supporters or Erdogan supporters, I should put it. It's more right, I think. Everything is going in the right direction because these people who are arrested or who are put in jail have ties with terrorism. But those are accusations, and people wait in jail for days, for months to hear accusations. Those who are not supporters of Erdogan are very critical and are very worried about the developments in Turkey, and they are afraid for their future. So that's why I insist that the EU should not cut talks with Turkey. It must give a positive support from the European side to those that are not supporters of Erdogan.
Remzi Aru, you said Turkey needs to be vigilant in the face of terrorism, in the face of attacks by the PKK, and, of course, against those who perpetrated the coup. But the fact is, thousands of people were arrested, detained in very short order after the coup attempt. So many that it seems quite implausible to think that all of them were linked to the coup. Do you truly say that all of these arrests, that mistreatment in prison is justified?
These are accusations, first of all, the mistreatments. So nobody knows. You have to see the documents and you have to follow up. So it is, first of all, an accusation. And,
Amnesty International has produced reports.
It's an accusation, yes. And so you have to...
Amnesty did have documentary evidence.
You have to control this first. But, you know, you have to put it into the right relation. In Germany, there was a hot autumn in the 70s, and in a time frame of 10 years, 30 people died. Tens of thousands were put out of the jobs, thousands were jailed, could not work. And so, you know, in Turkey, in one single day, 1.5 days, hundreds were killed, were overruled by tanks, were shot by planes, and so And furthermore, to this situation, some people who did the coup fled to Europe, and Europe said, you can come to us, you can get asylum. In the same time, Europe does not want to have people from Syria to come who are fleeing from the war to come to Europe in this situation. And in the same time, the PKK, which has killed tens of thousands of people, makes parties and celebrations of the founding year of the PKK in the center of Brussels and goes into parliaments. In this Turkish, in this situation where you have a lot of instabilizing facts coming also from Europe, and so you have to put this in this context to understand why things are like they are in Turkey.
Michel Thumann, does Europe have too little understanding of the degree to which Turkey is and feels threatened? We're hearing a comparison here to the time of RAF terrorism, the Red Brigade in Germany. Are we perhaps too blind about the degree to which Turkey is really destabilized by the immense threat around it?
Well, I think sometimes we do not have the right understanding of what's going on in Turkey, and sometimes we tend to, for example, to focus too strongly on the president, Erdogan. The German media sometimes are in a frenzy about every word he just said. And my response would be relax, and see what actually materializes after he has said something. But if we go into comparisons, I think it's a futile exercise to compare things because which are uncomparable.
Yes.
Because I think it's at the moment we are seeing two different planets there simply because Turkey is unique. It's unique in its beauty and it's unique in its huge troubles it is in and has brought itself in. So I would also discard the comparison between the RAF and what's going on in Turkey today, because there's been a coup first and then which then resulted into a witch hunt. So the question is, how do we get out of this situation that actually the problems of terror in Turkey are being addressed while political opponents remain untouched and the democratic system of Turkey remains intact and not severely damaged by a witch hunt which is going on at the moment, unfortunately.
I agree with you. There is a big problem in Turkey in terms of democracy, but it's not the problem of the ruling party, AKP. It's the problem that there's no opposition, no correct. If you look at the opposition at the CHP, if you look at the MHP, if you look, for instance, at the HDP, when they had 14%, I was the very first one to go into their center in Istanbul, Beyoğlu, and I congratulate them to see the atmosphere. It was a very beautiful atmosphere, and everybody was happy to be in the parliament. They had a lot of support, and sometimes you have to be a good politician. And Demirtas, for me, he is a brilliant talker. He has charisma, but he's not a good politician. In this moment, it was a big opportunity to say the PKK is a terror organization. He would have left 2% of his of the Falcons, and maybe 10 to 15% from other parties would have gone. And so this would have been a very good approach. But he did not do this. He did not put...
that would have been good, but still no reason to jail him.
We don't know what happened exactly. So there are accusations. If some people from the parliament transport weapons or go to funerals of terrorists who has committed suicide attacks, then you have to have at least a question mark. And I tell you, if something like this would happen in Germany or in the United States or wherever, the reactions would be much different, much more severe.
We would have been out of jail simply because the laws do not accept to detain people for such a long time.
Especially when they are a leader, when they are a chosen leader of a legitimate political party. He's not the leader of the Kurdish PKK movement. He's a leader of HDP, of the Kurdish political party, and he has been chosen by 15% of the country's people to be their
10%.
representative in the...
Okay.
I mean, we know what happened after the elections in June. I mean, all those bombings and things. I mean, it was a very, very difficult time period for Turkey, and people were afraid. It's a cliche in Turkey. It has become such a strong cliche to blame the opposition parties, to blame that they are weak, not to be able to fight Erdogan. I definitely think that's a cliche, because there is a strong opposition in Turkey. But if you rule a country with decrees, then the opposition can't do anything.
Okay,
when the state of emergency is so strong in the country, then what can the opposition do?
Let me take a step back now, because in order to talk about where we go from here, I would like to look once more at President Erdogan's threat to break off the refugee deal that he has made with the EU. So let's take a brief look at the statement that he made last week.
When 50,000 migrants turned up at a border crossing near Greece, you said, what are we going to do if Turkey opens its borders? Look, if you go any further, those border crossings will be opened.
Michel Thumann, would you expect President Erdogan to make good on that threat?
Not for the time being. He uses it as a constant threat to rally support at home, and he needs it for the referendum next year, so I think he won't tear up anything. Should he tear it up next year, I think the European Union would be prepared. The Balkan route is firmly closed. The sea between Italy and Greece is much larger than between the Greek islands and Turkey. So actually, I see it as an empty threat.
So even if it were carried out, you're telling us we wouldn't return to the kind of mass migration we saw in 2015. Gökcen Beyinli, does that give the EU some leeway then to perhaps take some distance from this? But if so, because you called for, essentially, for Europe to make a distinction between Erdogan and Turkey. But how do you do this? Erdogan is on the way to complete control of his country. You have to deal with Erdogan if you're in Europe and you want to deal with Turkey.
Yes, of course. He's the leader of the country. He's a chosen... he was a chosen prime minister. Now he's going to be... He wants to have all the powers as a president. But if you only concentrate, as you said, on his discourses, on his speeches, that would weaken Turkey's position with regard to the world, with regard to EU. Erdogan said, for instance, yesterday that the Turkish military army entered Syrian lands because they wanted to bring down the Assad government, the dictator Assad. And then after Russia warned him, he just said he switched today. 180%. And he said, no, we were there, we entered Syrian lands to clear the terrorist organizations. So Erdogan says something, and then the other said, when he says another thing, he takes a different perspective on the subject matter. So if EU pushes him hard not to cut the talks and to continue the negotiations, then I think Erdogan will change also.
Do you think that's right, Remzi Aru? And is there a different... You said both sides need to be honest.
Yes.
Is there a different forum in which talks should occur? For example, perhaps giving up on the idea of full membership and saying privileged partnership, something a little bit lower level, something a little bit more realistic, perhaps?
I don't know what the name of this could be or should be, but nowadays 70 to 80% of the people in Turkey are against the EU membership because they don't think that Europe is honest, and they don't think that the values Europe is always trying to market are true. Because
so what's the solution? What's the solution? What is the positive, constructive way forward for both sides?
Yes, let me just finish this one sentence. So I don't think that Erdogan is threatening anybody. He's just remembering on the agreements that are made. And I think with the history of Germany, where you had East Germany, where people could not go out of the country, I think it's not okay that Turkey would develop to East Germany and try to bring people away from leaving the country. If they want to leave, they leave. And Erdogan is only remembering that it's not possible that to individualize strategic and profits, but to socialize the costs on Turkey, and that's it. Finally, so
Okay, but what's your solution? If you could advise the EU right now, if Brussels brought you in and said,
advice for the EU would be try to work together with the people who know the region. This is mainly Turkey, who have been there for hundreds of years, for nearly 1,000 years, and don't try to solve the problems around this on your own way by supporting the PKK, the YPG, by supporting strange people by weapons, because this will destabilize Turkey. And the destabilized Turkey, and even to Germans who don't like Turks, I say you have to stabilize it, because otherwise, if Turkey is destabilized, not 2 million refugees will come, 20 million will come.
Michel Thumann, are we likely to see increasing divergence between the EU and Turkey? Will things get worse before they get better?
Yes, I see increasing divergence before the referendum, and my hope is that after Erdogan has got his presidency finally, in the new constitution he'll relax a bit, and then there will be some kind of a rapprochement, tense rapprochement, I suppose.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. See you soon.